He hadn't told anyone this. Not his daughter, not the elders, not the priests who burned incense at Solomon's temple a quarter-mile to the west. Every night for 11 years, Tobias the potter climbed the stone stairs to his rooftop and spoke to a god he wasn't sure could hear him. The night air over the Kidron Valley carried the scent of kiln smoke and wild thyme. Above the flat rooftops of the quarter, the Temple Mount rose like a stone crown against the sky, its torches throwing long copper shadows across the limestone walls. Tobias knelt on a worn reed mat, his potter's hands pressed flat against the cool stone, and he prayed the way he always prayed, quietly, carefully, choosing each word the way he chose clay from the field outside the dung gate, with patience, with attention, with the hope that what he shaped might hold water. His knees ached. They'd ached for the last 3 years, the kind of deep soreness that settles into a man who spends his days bent over a wheel. But the ache wasn't what kept him awake on this rooftop. It was the silence. 11 years of faithful prayer, and God hadn't spoken. Not once, not a whisper, not a sign. The Psalms say, "I cry out to you, Lord, and you do not answer." Tobias knew that psalm. He'd lived it. But the psalmist always turned the corner, always found the praise hidden beneath the lament. Tobias was still looking for the corner, still waiting for the turn.
I don't need thunder. I don't need fire from the sky. Just something. One word. Anything that tells me I'm not speaking to empty air.
He picked up the small clay cup he'd shaped that afternoon. A ritual now. Before every prayer, he formed a vessel. Nothing fancy. Just a cup, pressed from leftover clay, smoothed with his thumb. He set it beside his lamp and poured in a measure of water from the goatskin at his hip. A cup poured out. A heart poured out. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Below the rooftop, the Kidron Quarter stirred with the sounds of a city that couldn't sleep. Sennacherib's army had taken Lachish 3 weeks ago. 46 fortified cities of Judah, gone. The Assyrian war machine was grinding south, and the only thing between its spears and Solomon's temple was King Hezekiah's faith, and a set of hastily reinforced walls. Fear had a smell in the quarter now, sour, like old sweat and overripe grain. The market had been half empty for days. Prices doubled on bread, tripled on oil, and in the gaps between haggling voices, Tobias heard what he'd been hearing for weeks. The argument that had split his neighborhood down its center. Nepheg the merchant had started it. 3 days ago, standing on an overturned grain basket in the market square, his voice carrying over the spice stalls and past the weaver's row.
We must protect our families. Faith is our only fortress now. How long will we kneel while Sennacherib marches? Egypt has chariots. Egypt has soldiers.
The crowd had shifted. Some nodded. Others looked away. Tobias had been carrying a stack of finished bowls to the merchant stalls and froze mid-step. Not because the words surprised him, because they tempted him. 11 years of silence. And Nepheg was offering an answer that didn't require faith, just politics, just a treaty, just the comfortable mathematics of alliances and swords. But Tobias noticed something the crowd didn't. Nepheg's left hand, the one not gesturing at the crowd, was closed tight around a small wooden toy. A child's horse, carved from olive wood, the paint long worn to bare grain. His son Micah had held that horse the day the fever took hold. Nepheg hadn't let go of it since. That night, Tobias prayed differently. Not the careful, measured words. Something rawer. He pressed his forehead against the stone and said,
God, I don't know what to do. The harvest
His
failed.
daughter, Keturah, found him there an hour later. She'd climbed the stairs with a blanket and a question she'd been carrying for months. "Father, does he ever answer? Honestly?" Tobias looked at her. This young woman with his wife's eyes and his own stubborn jaw. And he wanted to lie. He wanted to say, yes, of course, every night. His voice is like honey and thunder and everything the priests describe. But the Psalms don't pretend, and neither could he.
But I can only give you the truth. Not the way I expected.
She sat beside
Not
him.
yet.
They watched the stars. Neither spoke, and the silence between them was the same silence Tobias had been praying into for 11 years. Vast, unbroken, and somehow not empty. Not quite. It was near the third watch when the footsteps came. Light. Quick. A woman's stride on the stone stairs. Tobias turned and saw Makkah, Nepheg's wife, her face half hidden beneath a linen veil, her eyes wide with something that wasn't fear, something closer to wonder.
Tobias,
She was trembling, not from the cold.
I pray too.
My husband would.
Every night after Nepheg sleeps, I press my face into the wool and I pray.
He is risen.
Last
And the
night,
stone is rolled
I heard
away.
something.
I believe you, Mom.
Not a voice,
Tell me
not
everything.
words. A knowing, deep in my chest, like warmth spreading through cold clay.
Tobias couldn't speak. His hands gripped the edge of the rooftop wall.
A voice was heard. After 11 years, you must go. He is well.
The oil lamp flickered. The stars burned. And for the first time in 11 years, Tobias the potter felt something crack open in his chest. Not an answer, not yet, but the shape of one. The way wet clay holds the memory of the potter's hands before the vessel is finished. Something was being formed. And it wasn't the cup beside his lamp. It was him. The morning after Makar's visit, Tobias sat at his potter's wheel and couldn't make his hands work. The clay spun. His foot pressed the treadle. But his fingers, those steady, reliable instruments that had shaped 10,000 vessels, kept drifting to the wrong pressure. Too light, then too heavy. The rim wobbled, buckled, collapsed. He'd been a potter for 31 years. His hands had never betrayed him. But Marker's words had settled into his bones overnight. God said your name. And now everything familiar felt tilted, like a house built on shifting sand. He left the wheel, walked through the dung gate with his clay-gathering sack over one shoulder and his questions pressing heavier than the bag ever could. The potter's field spread before him, cracked red earth, shallow excavation pits, the Hinnom Valley dropping away to the south like a wound in the landscape.
I have shaped this
He knelt at the edge of a pit and dug his fingers into the
How
soil.
did I not
Clay remembers everything. Every season of rain, every drought, every fire that hardened the ground above it. A good potter reads the clay the way a priest reads Torah, layer by layer, feeling for the story buried beneath the surface. Tobias pressed a handful between his palms and felt it yield. Cool, compliant, ready to become whatever the potter decided.
Is that what you're doing? Digging me out of the ground? pressing me between your hands.
God of Abraham.
He found Azariah at the temple gate that afternoon. The old man sat where he always sat, on a worn limestone step near the beautiful gate, his sightless eyes turned toward the sky, his lips moving in constant prayer. Azariah prayed the way rivers flow, without ceasing, without self-consciousness, without any apparent concern for who was listening. Most people walked past him. Tobias had walked past him 1,000 times. But today, he stopped, sat beside the blind man on the warm stone, and listened.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is. Lord, my bones are tired and my back is...
There was no performance in it, no ritual polish. Azariah prayed like a child talks to a parent, unfiltered, messy, real. He complained about his aching hip. He thanked God for the warmth of the stone. He wept over sins committed 40 years ago. He laughed at a memory of his dead wife's cooking. It was the most beautiful thing Tobias had heard in 11 years. He touched Azariah's sleeve. The old man turned his head.
How do you know?
Azariah's face cracked into a smile, a network of lines deepening around eyes that saw nothing and somehow saw everything.
And there's a canyon between those two words that most people never cross.
He reached for Tobias's hand and held it the way you'd hold a piece of unformed clay, gently, with intention.
God doesn't speak to the ears, Tobias. He speaks to the clay.
That evening, Keturah was waiting at the foot of the rooftop stairs, arms crossed. Her loom sat idle behind her, threads half woven, the pattern abandoned mid-row. She'd been crying. Tobias could see the salt tracks on her cheeks, catching lamplight.
Tobias.
I feared you wouldn't return. Father,
He sat
I
on the
have
lowest
spoken,
step,
and I need
waited.
you, NOT,
I stopped
to quote
praying.
a psalm.
3 months ago, I just
I
stopped,
didn't know how to tell
and
you
nothing
the carries
changed.
in my heart, but I had
The
to.
sun
I
rose,
hear you,
the
child.
bread baked,
Speak your mind freely.
Nepheg's speeches got louder, and Sennacherib got closer, and my prayers, they didn't move a single grain of sand.
3 moons
So I stopped,
You left.
and
That is
nothing,
the truth of it.
nothing was different.
I hear you, child.
Tobias felt the words like a blade between his
You are
ribs.
forgiven, my child.
Not because she was wrong, because he'd thought the same thing 100 times, 1,000 times. The difference between father and daughter was 30 years of
I
stubbornness,
cannot offer you
and he
comfort.
wasn't sure stubbornness counted as faith.
I know. I won't quote it all. But let me ask you one thing.
When you stop praying,
She opened her mouth,
silence louder
closed
and
it.
louder.
Her eyes flooded, louder. It was so much louder. That night, Tobias climbed the stairs and did something he'd never done in 11 years of rooftop prayer. He stopped reciting, stopped choosing careful words, stopped performing for a God he couldn't see. He lay flat on the stone, face down, arms spread, forehead pressed against the rough surface, and he told the truth.
I'm afraid. I'm afraid you're not there. I'm afraid Nepheg is right, and the sky is empty, and I've wasted 11 years talking to stone. I'm afraid for my daughter. I'm afraid for this city. I'm afraid I don't have enough faith for what's coming.
He paused, The night pressed close. A dog barked somewhere in the lower quarter. Wind moved through the valley, carrying the distant sound of a Levite's lyre. Shalom, probably, practicing his psalms near the temple wall. Something shifted. Not in the sky, not in the city, in him. The way clay shifts when the potter applies exactly the right pressure. Not breaking, not collapsing, but yielding, becoming the shape it was always meant to hold. He wept, not from sadness, from honesty. And for the first time, the silence felt less like absence and more like someone listening very, very carefully. 3 days later, the Rabshakeh came. Sennacherib's envoy stood outside the walls of the city, close enough for his voice to carry over the battlements, and he spoke in Hebrew so every citizen could understand. The words were designed to destroy faith the way a siege engine destroys stone. Your God cannot save you. No God has saved any nation from Assyria's hand. Surrender now, and you will live. Resist, and you will share the fate of every city that trusted its gods against us. The priests tore their garments. Women pressed their children against their chests. Nepheg stood in the market and said nothing, just held his son's wooden horse and stared at the ground. And Tobias felt something impossible rising through the center of his chest. Not fear, not hope exactly. Something older. Something that had been forming in the silence for 11 years without his knowledge. Shaped by hands he couldn't see, fired in a kiln he never chose. Certainty. Not the certainty of answers, the certainty of presence. The unshakable knowing that the silence had never been empty. That every night on that rooftop, every unanswered prayer, every tear shed into the dark, had been heard. King Hezekiah took the Rabshakeh's letter, that parchment dripping with Assyrian arrogance, and carried it up the temple steps, past the bronze laver, past the altar of incense, into the presence of the Almighty. And he spread it out, not like a king presenting a document, like a child spreading a drawing before a parent saying, "Look at this. Look at what they're saying about you." Tobias wasn't in the temple. He was on his rooftop. He couldn't see the king's prayer, but he could feel it, the way the whole city seemed to hold its breath, the way the very air above the Kidron Valley grew thick and still, like the moment before rain breaks a drought. The Psalms have a word for this: Selah. It appears 71 times in the Psalter, and nobody knows exactly what it means. Some say it's a musical pause, a rest between movements. Others say it means listen. Either way, it marks the moment when something shifts, when the lament turns, when the silence becomes the answer. Selah. The city waited, and Tobias picked up his clay cup and poured water into it. The ritual he'd practiced for years, but tonight, his hands didn't shake. His voice didn't crack. He poured slowly, watched the water fill the vessel, and understood.
You've been shaping me this whole time. 11 years on this rooftop, and I thought I was praying to you, but you were praying into me.
Below the rooftop, footsteps. Keturah climbed the stone stairs without a word, her weaver's hands carrying a small loaf of bread and a cluster of dried figs. She set them beside her father and sat. For a long time, they watched the Temple Mount, where torch smoke curled against a sky crowded with stars.
For the I prayed again today.
Tobias turned to her.
3 months. I didn't ask for anything. I just told the truth. The way you taught
He
me.
reached for her hand. 2 potter's hands and 2 weaver's hands. Both calloused, both strong, both shaped by years of patient, repetitive work that produced beauty one small motion at a time.
That is prayer, Keturah. The rest is just decoration.
The word came before dawn, not through thunder, not through fire, through a man. Isaiah the prophet sent a message to Hezekiah, and the message burned through the city like light through a cracked wall. God had heard. God would answer. The Assyrian king would not enter the city, would not fire an arrow against it, would not even build a siege ramp against its walls. He would return the way he came, by the road he came, by the same road he will return. Sennacherib's 185,000 soldiers, the greatest army the ancient world had ever assembled, would be turned back. Not by Egypt's chariots, not by political alliances, not by any strategy Nepheg could have negotiated. By God, speaking through a prophet, answering a king's prayer, and answering, though no one would write it in any scroll, 11 years of a potter's faithfulness on a rooftop in the Kidron Valley.
But you took him.
The morning that followed was unlike any Tobias had known. The city erupted, shouting, singing, weeping with relief. Levites poured into the temple courts, and Shallum's lyre rang out the opening measures of a psalm Tobias had prayed 100 times, but never fully heard until now. The Lord is my shepherd. Not our shepherd, my shepherd. Personal, intimate, a relationship spoken in the singular. In the market square, Tobias found Nepheg. The merchant was sitting on the same overturned grain basket where he'd called for Egyptian alliances 3 weeks ago. He wasn't speaking. He was holding the wooden horse, Micah's toy, and his shoulders were moving in a rhythm Tobias recognized immediately. The rhythm of a man praying through tears. Tobias sat beside him, said nothing. There are moments when the most sacred thing you can do for another person is sit in their silence, the way God sat in yours, patient, present, waiting for the clay to soften enough to hold a new shape.
I cannot say his name. He is lost. You carry it all, Nepheg. Let go.
His voice broke. The wooden horse pressed against his chest.
He's gone, my boy.
How do you pray to someone who let your child suffer?
Why did you do this? Why him?
Tobias didn't answer with theology. He didn't quote Isaiah. He didn't offer 5 steps to restored faith. He put his arm around the man who'd mocked prayer in the public square. And he said the only honest thing he could.
I did not think you would still be here. The days were long, and the nights felt endless. But
Nepheg
somehow,
looked at him,
you kept going.
this potter with clay-stained hands and an unshakable habit of climbing rooftops to talk to the sky. And something cracked. Not broken, opened. The way a seed cracks when the first root pushes through. Painful, necessary. The beginning of something that only grows in the dark. That evening, Marka found Tobias at the market. Her eyes were red from weeping, but her smile was the kind that comes after a long rain.
He's coming home. He prayed for the first time in white years. He held Micah's horse and he
Tobias
prayed.
nodded. There were no words large enough for this moment. A man who'd abandoned God had found his way back, not through arguments or sermons or proof, through the quiet witness of people who kept praying when prayer seemed useless. The Psalms end with praise. After every lament, every cry, every shaking fist at a silent sky, the Psalms return to praise. Not because the problems disappear, because the perspective shifts. Because the one who prays discovers they've been changed by the conversation, even when the answer comes differently than expected. God speaks through prayer. Not always in words, sometimes in the slow, patient shaping of a human heart, the way a potter shapes clay. Pressure here, release there. Water when the surface cracks. Fire when the form is ready. And always, always, the hands of the one who sees the finished vessel before the first turn of the wheel. That night, Tobias climbed the stairs one more time. Keturah followed. So did Azariah, helped up the steps by Shallum, the young Levite who carried his own lyre. Maacah came, her veil loose around her shoulders, no longer hiding. 5 people on a rooftop in the Kidron Valley. A potter, a weaver, a blind man, a musician, and a woman who prayed in secret until the secret wasn't needed anymore. They sat, they breathed, they watched the stars crowd the sky above Solomon's temple. And Tobias poured water into his clay cup one final time. But tonight, he didn't stop at the rim. He poured until it overflowed, water running between his fingers, pooling on the stone, catching starlight.
And my cup overflows.
The 23rd Psalm, the most personal prayer ever written, spoken by a potter who finally understood that the 11 years of silence hadn't been silence at all. They'd been the hands of God, shaping, pressing, holding, firing the clay until it could hold living water without breaking. God is speaking through prayer, not to the ears, to the clay. And the clay is you.